Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 44, brought to you by Black Belt Magazine. And today we are in for a wild ride as we're going to go all the way back to one of the very first episodes of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, before we were even on video, long before we were on Black Belt Magazine. All the way back in episode 3, I discussed the best forms that I've ever seen with my own eyes. And since recording that episode of the podcast, I've, of course, thought of some more forms that I think are some of the best that I've ever seen as well. But that will be in a future episode, because back when I did episode 3, like I mentioned, we still didn't have video. It was just an audio podcast, right? So now we have this video, we have the Black Belt Magazine platform, and one of the big complaints that I heard from that episode 3 is, man, we hear you talking about these forms, but we wish that we could watch these forms with you, and that's exactly what we're going to do right now. Now, some of these forms have been covered in previous podcast film study episodes, but this is going to be through a little bit of a different lens, where I'm going to be speaking of these forms more so from my point of view when I was that age, when I was watching them, how they were influential to me, and how they would be influential to the history of sport karate over the next decade or 2 decades, depending upon how long ago these forms occurred. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right into it. This is going to be in the exact same order that all of the forms were mentioned in episode 3, but obviously we're going to be watching the forms as we go today, beginning with Matt Emig here at the Forms Grands of the U.S. Open in 2008. I remember sitting in the night show audience and watching this. Now, not only is this one of my favorite forms of all time, but it's also one of my favorite uniforms of all time. We see Matt here wearing the shampoo bottle Paul Mitchell uniform. I'm very fortunate to have a pair of these gi pants. I wish I could get a top there. But these are all vintage Paul Mitchell uniforms from before I was on the team. We see Matt taking off here, very strong hand combination. That was one thing that I always loved about Matt, is that Matt was never hyper-focused, huge rodeo right there, and we're going to rewind and talk about some of these techniques in particular. But one thing that I always respected about Matt was that he didn't get caught up like a lot of modern competitors do in how fast the hands are moving, although clearly he had great hand speed. But Matt was clearly more focused on the power and the technique of those hand combinations, making sure he had full extension, good clean punches, good lines. I mean, look at that. That was just a switch reverse punch before going into that front kick combo there, and he extended it beautifully, right? And that may seem like that's trivial and basic, but that's something that you really don't see often enough in modern competition, is an obsession with those basics and executing them with power and cleanliness. So we're going to watch this again just because I want to highlight some of these particular techniques a bit more. I've already spoke about how much I respect his hand combo skills, but then look at this. We see the front sweep there going into the raise, and then the huge rodeo cork. We'd also call that a shuriken cork because he comes out of it, that huge crescent kick at the end of it. And extremely difficult to grab his foot there at the end of that technique. We're going to watch this replay one more time. We see he does the raise, and then look at that beautiful full extension on the crescent kick. Right hand is grabbing the right leg. He balances as he rotates all the way around through the end of that technique. That's an extremely difficult technique. Then we have a brandy statue. Brandy being the round-off equivalent of an aerial. So an aerial is a cartwheel with no hands. Brandy would be a round-off with no hands. And then he takes that immediately into one of his signature moves, which is the statue. He was known for beginning a lot of his forms with a standing statue technique, so that was definitely a Matt Emig signature, as well as that cheat 720 kick to the splits there, and then of course the ki going away from the judges to bring the form to an end. Matt Emig, in my opinion, the greatest extreme martial artist of all time. When you take tricking, forms performance, and weapons performance all into account to summarize an extreme martial artist, Matt Emig, in my opinion, is the GOAT of extreme martial arts. And there's a slow-mo of that technique. I mean, that's just beautiful. 2 full rotations on one foot while holding the leg coming out of that corkscrew. There's the beautiful extension on the statue. Can't say enough good things about Matt Emig. And I remember that form and how impactful it was to me, as of course we're going to get hit with an ad here telling us how to get in shape, it looks like. And now we're going to transition from Matt Emig to Austin Crane. So I was in the crowd watching that Matt Emig form back in 2008. That was back when I was still a young competitor. I was like, oh, maybe I'll be a tricker one day and try to be like Matt. And as many of you who have followed my career know, I did not become a tricker. I very much became a weapons guy and a bow staff specialist. But then I do remember 2013 is when I was kind of coming into my own, and I had established myself as a good competitor, and I was on Paul Mitchell. So I was actually one of Austin Crane's teammates when he was running this form. And this is a form that may not necessarily stand out to a lot of other people just because it's not the form that actually won. This was a form that happened in a division that there was a lot of controversy about maybe who should have won this division. It was a stacked division. If I remember correctly, obviously I know Austin Crane was in it. The winner would wind up being the Kung Fu stylist Sen Gao, who had accumulated several wins over the past about year and a half leading up to US Open, but actually fell on one of his techniques in this form and somehow was not caught by the judges that evening. And that's kind of the big point of contention about this division. But nonetheless, it was Sen Gao, Austin Crane. I believe Michael Guthrie was in this division as well, kind of in the early stages of Michael Guthrie's kind of resurgence back onto the North American Sport Karate Association scene when he was representing the American World Competition team. And then I believe Micah Carnes was also in this grand championship. So forgive me if I'm wrong in quoting that, but I'm fairly certain this division was Austin Crane, Micah Carnes, Michael Guthrie, which is a ton of extreme forms talent right there. And then Sen Gao, who had the apparent fall on what was supposed to be a double B twist split where he kind of landed more on his back. Ultimately, Sen Gao would wind up getting the win. In my opinion, this was the best form in the division. I admit my Paul Mitchell bias because Austin's a Paul Mitchell member, but this form, and this is, Austin was kind of making a comeback with this form. Austin was a very, very successful junior competitor, dominant in 13 and under, very, very consistent in 14 to 17 with his comma form and with his extreme form. And then when he went off to college and, moved up into the adult division, he kind of stepped away from the sport for a while, but this was kind of his comeback. Around the same time, he was doing that epic all-time great synchronized form with Matt Emig, which is kind of why this thought chain flows this way, where we go from Matt Emig on to Austin Crane. So now I'm going to stop talking so much and we're going to go on and we're going to enjoy this form here. And then I love just how loose he is. He clapping, just trying to get himself psyched up there before he runs the form. If we look in the background, I believe that we see Mr. Bob Leiker, the coach of the American World Competition team, probably there to support Mike Guthrie over to the side. And then we see Austin Crane open up this form with that double Webster, the swing through Webster. That was a signature of his, very hard to do. And then huge D-leg full coming up at the end of that combo there. Full speed on the hands. And then this is my favorite part of the whole form. Boom, boom, double statue. So whereas in the previous form with Matt Emig, we saw him do the brandy to the single statue with that one big leg grab. If you notice on that technique, which we will rewind that when the form is over, Austin actually grabbed both legs while he was doing that flip, ends it strong with the Webster. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go back one form before we get over to Brendan Hewer here. And of course, we're going to have another advertisement. That's always the worst part of the film study episodes. We get hit with these YouTube ads. All right, here we go. So real quick, I want to show a replay of this double Webster because that was a signature move of his as well. Then we'll show a replay of that double statue. So there's the Webster swing right through into another one, hitting the splits at the end. That's extremely difficult to do. That was the signature of Austin Crane's. And now we're going to fast forward to that double statue, which I believe is coming up here as he works his way over to the back corner of the ring. Yes. And then here it is. 1, 2, you see him grab first the left, I believe it was, and then the right leg, kind of grabbing each leg as he comes over through the end of that flip. That's a double statue. I've never seen that done in competition before. I had never seen it up until this point, and I've not seen it attempted, let alone accomplished, since then. So that was an extremely passionate, powerful form from Austin Crane there. That's just always stood out to me as a great, great form that didn't win, but maybe in my opinion should have. But you can make a case for everybody in that division. You can make a case for why Micah should have won. You can make a case for how Michael Guthrie should have won. It was just an incredibly deep division, and all of those men showed up and showed out that night. So much respect to everybody in that 2013 US Open Grand Championship for the men's forms category. Staying on this theme of men's forms, we now go to Brendan Hewer. In my opinion, and this might be a little bit of a controversial take, in my opinion, the greatest Team AKA representative of all time. I'm sure that can be debatable, but just for his overall talent, whether it was hard style, soft style, didn't matter. Brendan Hewer had it all, forms, weapons. And then I know that I'm just kind of casually talking about Brendan Hewer while he's doing this excellent routine. This is my favorite part. He walks into that kind of front handspring, front walkover variation, carrying that through into the combo with the round off the back handspring and the flash kick. We see the jump front kick there, the Webster, and then the strong finish. We're going to go ahead and play this form back one more time because it was a relatively short form, but that's okay. And the reason that this form stood out to me was that, once again, this is back in 2008, the same year that Matt Emig had that great U.S. Open form. But there was a 6-month stretch from the AKA Grand Nationals up to that U.S. Open in which Brendan Hewer was absolutely dominant when he would show up to a tournament with this form. I remember the choreography was great. He did it to Kiss Kiss by Chris Brown and T-Pain, and it was just such an iconic form, and it went on such a great run. And I believe that was around the time that Matt Emig was maybe recovering from that injury that he had, that devastating knee injury, which is maybe what kind of allowed Brendan Hewer to kind of make his presence known with this little run that he had. But it was certainly not a coming out party for Brendan Hewer. Brendan Hewer had been known for a long time before he went on that successful run. He had won a lot of overall grands, had won Warrior Cups before he had that really successful run in 2008. And then I believe, don't quote me on this because I'm not sure, I believe he might have won the Diamond Ring that year as well. I have to go over to the Diamond Nationals website and double check that. But I just remember how dominant Brendan Hewer was with that form. And any time that someone is the greatest of all time for a particular team, it's obviously very important to give them their respect. And that's how highly I think of Brendan Hewer. Brendan Hewer, one of the all-time greats in my opinion, excellent extreme forms competitor, but also very, very good in weapons, soft style forms, so many other categories. And that's kind of the legacy that Brendan Hewer left. Not to mention the fact that he had an extremely talented sister as well, Dana Hewer, who also represented Team AKA, but would later go on to represent Team Paul Mitchell. And she was a dominant competitor as well, a dominant force, especially in the junior girls divisions for many years, and then won a couple of overall grands in the women's division when she came to be an adult. Now we're going to shift off of the forms and we're going to shift more into the weapons. And by the way, one thing that I want to point out here, these forms are in no particular order. It's not like Matt was number 10 and now we're moving. No, it's not like that. These forms are in no particular order. This is just a collection of the forms that stand out to me as some of the best, meaning either most well executed or most influential forms that I've ever seen. And now we transition to a representative of Team Straight Up. This is Billy Ledger. And now we're going to talk about some of those influential forms, right? Almost any bow staff student that I've ever had that wants to be a world champion caliber creative bow, creative weapons, open weapons, whatever you want to call it, that wants to be a world champion caliber competitor in that particular style, every single one of them I make watch this form from Billy Ledger. Because this Billy Ledger routine was at the Pan American Internationals in 2007. To my knowledge, it's the only overall that he ever won. So in my opinion, a very underrated competitor. And if I'm wrong about that, if anybody knows about more overall grand championships that he won, go ahead and throw those down in the comments and give him his respect, because I have the utmost respect for Billy Ledger, A, because he's underrated and because not enough people know about who this man is, but B, because of the actual techniques that he does in this form that are, in many cases, a decade ahead of his time. So let's have a look at this and pay very close attention to the beginning of the routine here, because the opening trick combo holds so much about the history of performance bow and bow staff tricking. So we see here Billy Ledger getting ready. He's wearing the Hakama, which is a very old school look. Back in the day, it seemed like everybody was wearing Hakamas back in the era of Mike Bernardo and Gary Waugh. Corey Lutkus, who we're going to get to in this, also wore Hakama for almost the entirety of his career. When he got to the adult division, he lost the Hakama, but as a junior, he always wore it. So look at that. He just caught the bow in his elbow, coming off of that release, and flicked it the other way. Then he does a 360 inverted over the head catch. Both of those moves were not seen again in competition for another 10 years after this routine occurred. Like, get that. Just I can't stress that enough. Like, I'm not even able to speak English. I'm thinking about that so hard. This man was doing tricks that no one else attempted in a form for the next decade. That's how ahead of his time he was. And then we see very fast striking combination here. There was another move that I want to hit on that he already accomplished. We see the big shoulder neck roll to the elbow trap there, popping that up in the air and then finishing that routine. We obviously see the intensity there. Now, granted, this is in 2007. I started competing in 2005. I started traveling the circuit consistently in 2006. So I was obviously at this Pan Am's. Like I said, this is a list of the greatest forms that I've seen with my own eyes is the key word. This does not account for all of the great forms that happened before I was able to watch with my own eyes. There is one exception that I've included, and we're going to get to that. I believe it's the next video. But anyway, so in 2007, I saw this form from Billy Ledger, and that was kind of my first exposure to Billy Ledger. So I admit that I have a limited sample size, but I believe the reason that he didn't win more than he did is because he was attempting so many of these innovative tricks that he had a relatively high drop rate because he was trying so much, right? But at the end of the day, you've got to respect the guts that he had to go out and try some of this stuff. One of the tricks, actually, I'm going to go ahead and rewind all the way to this opening combo here so that we can catch this release that he does, catching in the elbow and then the over the head inverted catch. So here comes the catch in the elbow. He's going to throw right in the elbow, throwing it back the other direction. That is so hard to do. If you do bow and you never tried that, go try that. And then inverted 360, inverted meaning that he had his hand upside down, did the 360 spin, caught the bow over his head. Intercepting the bow's momentum like that is extremely difficult to do. And then the reason we're replaying this, he has a creative neck roll there, which is very nice. But then he does a move that has been very, very popular, right? Coming up right here. He does that strike. And then that's a move that I have always called the Kill Bill, throwing it from behind the back, one of the earliest from behind the back throws, or what today I call a zero gravity, one of those earliest variations of that technique that we ever saw in competition, and then flicking that behind the back to a behind the back catch. In 2007, that was a very, very technical technique, and that is something that from the moment he did that in 2007 until I came around and added that to my form in about 2010 and kind of repopularized it, as we get another ad here. So I kind of repopularized that technique in 2010, and from there it stuck. That technique has been around for a long, long time, really from 2010 when I put it into my form and kind of revitalized that move of Billy Ledger's. That move has been in a lot of world champion caliber forms ever since then as a key transition move. And that's one really interesting topic, is how the utility of bow moves and weapons tricks in general can change over the years as the sport becomes more and more advanced, right? In 2007, as you can tell from the way he set it up, he had a pause before it. There was, you can't hear the music, of course, but there's a music change that happened when he would do that technique. That was a major moment in his form. He had the major moments in the beginning where he had the elbow trap and then he had the inverted over the head catch on the 360 spin. But then when he gets to that middle part of the form, as he transitions into that closing segment, the major turning point of that form is that Kill Bill, is that throw from behind the back and then the flick to the behind the back. And then today you see that done primarily as a setup move. Much like in 2007, people would have used a hand roll or a hand roll combination to set up a release. Nowadays, people are using that move that was a big move in 2007. They're using that Kill Bill to set up double spins and triple spins and bigger bow staff techniques. I've got some students that even do the Kill Bill technique and then take that behind the back catch and whip it around and go into an acrobatic kicking tricking combination, right? So it's very fascinating to see how the utility of moves changes over the years. I was mistaken. I thought that we were going to get to the form that I had not seen yet as the next video, but that will be coming up shortly. This is another form that I did watch with my own eyes, and this was a major, major, major form in the men's weapons division at the Diamond Nationals. This is a diamond ring winning form. If I'm not mistaken, it may be one of the first diamond rings that was won with a soft style weapons routine since as far back as Ming Lu. I'm having trouble thinking of anybody else, maybe Richard Brandon, but I think you have to go back that far to find a soft style competitor winning the weapons grands at the Diamond Nationals. And Austin Jorgensen was the first person to do that. I can say with confidence, I think he was the first person to do that in at least a decade. It may have been 2 decades or even 25 years since somebody with soft style or wushu, Chinese weapons. The open circuit, North American Sport Karate Association, or other leagues always kind of struggle with what you should name this, right? Chinese weapons to represent Kung Fu. People call it Wushu. People call it soft style. I think that you guys understand what I'm saying when I use all of those terms. And so this is a drunken fist sword form that Austin Jorgensen is performing here. And to me, this is one of the most iconic individual performances that I've ever seen in my life. Some people have iconic careers, your Matt Immigs, your Kalmachokas, your Casey Marks, your Kevin Thompson, your Pedro Xavier, so on and so forth, Raymond Daniels, so on and so forth, right? Some people have iconic moments that stand out even more than their great careers. And Austin Jorgensen had a great career. He had probably a 4 to 5 year prime when he was at his peak, busting onto the scene, winning overall grands, representing the American World Competition team, then being picked up by Paul Mitchell and winning many overall grands for us. So Austin Jorgensen was one of those that did have a very good career. But to me, this is the moment that cements Austin Jorgensen in history, is this routine. So let's go ahead and enjoy this. I also love Austin's demeanor when he would start a form. It's just, super relaxed, very typical of a soft style or a wushu kung fu competitor. You see that kind of relaxed nature. We see a huge gainer to open up this routine here, but it's not about the tricking. It's not about the kung fu acrobatics that you're going to see in this routine. This is all about his broadsword, his straight sword here. It is all about this straight sword routine. And so obviously we see the drama here. Now, anybody else that has ever watched this form knows that Tequila was his signature song. It was a remix of Tequila. And then look at this. Did you see that? I'm going to rewind. I'm not even going to let him finish the form. I'm going to rewind. Because I cannot believe, again, whenever I see something this cool, I stop. My ability to speak English goes out the window. So he did a corkscrew to the leg there. And then he throws the sword up, kicks the sword while he's doing a kip up, and then catches the sword once he is on his way standing up. Then he releases a straight sword there. You almost never saw that, a release with a straight sword. He does a palm spin. This is taking a page out of Bo's book, and then look at this. He does a perfectly placed release of the sword, forward roll, and then it falls. He almost didn't even have to look at it. It just falls right into his hand. I'm convinced that Austin Jorgensen became a sorcerer in the middle of this routine. It doesn't make sense to me how he executed these moves so flawlessly. This man trained in Colorado in a park for the Diamond Nationals. I remember him telling me, because we were teammates at this time, of course, I remember him telling me that he didn't have a space to train for whatever reason leading up to the U.S. Open that year and the Diamond Nationals this year. And he was training in a park outside, rolling around in the grass, perfecting these types of incredible techniques. We're going to rewind that. We're going to watch it one more time, because I just cannot stress enough how impressive this is on the part of Austin Jorgensen to be able to pull off some of these moves. The corkscrew to the side there is already difficult enough. And then the kip up, kicking the sword, standing up, making the catch. And then now I'm gonna go ahead and shift my focus so I can prepare to commentate on this release to the forward roll because of how impressive that is. He also did this with a monkey staff form later in his career at the Compete Nationals. Look at that. I don't even think he's looking at it. He puts his hand up. He's looking forward. The sword just falls into his hand like it's Thor's hammer. It's incredible. And then obviously we see the great kung fu flexibility with him leaning back. Obviously that's simulating in the drunken fist style, drinking from a keg, right? And then the fast sword manipulation. Look at that stance. I mean, that's just beautiful. We talk about the tricks. We talk about the speed. We talk about the flawless execution of the kung fu techniques. That stance is extremely difficult to pull off. And then he sells himself sobering up there at the end of the form. And then just a beautiful finish. Absolutely deserving of a diamond ring. One of my favorite forms that I have ever had the pleasure of watching. I loved that Austin Jorgensen routine. If you couldn't already tell by my multiple voice cracks and my inability to speak English while I was commentating that routine. Now we're going to transition over. This is the form that is going to be included in my best forms that I've ever seen that I did not watch in person. And I regret that I did not watch this in person. I've never been much of an NBL competitor. I've done a few tournaments that I was flown out to, thanks to Canell Lovelace and the North American International Karate Championships. But that's beside the point. So this is NBL Super Grands, which is a very prestigious event. And this is Casey Marks Nash. This is who, in my opinion, who I believe to be the greatest bow staff competitor of all time. She walked so that all of us in the modern era could run. And what's most impressive to me about Casey is that she had two different primes. She had a prime back in the mid to late 90s when she was kind of in the junior division and moving up into the adult division, in which she was dominant just because she was doing things that other people couldn't do. She was faster than other bow staff competitors. She was doing more advanced release techniques than the other competitors. One of the first spinning bow release techniques that we ever saw was at the 1995 US Open, performed by Casey Marks, right? So she was in her first prime as a trendsetter because she was faster and she was stronger and she could do more difficult things than what other people could do. Then she goes into her second prime, which I would say began in around 2004 and really has continued until the present day. I mean, she was competing at the Quebec Open and contending for overall grand championships as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. So an incredibly long prime for Casey Marks Nash. In my opinion, and again, I'm biased because Casey, and I'll go ahead and reveal some of my bias here, because Casey is part of my bow lineage. My instructor, my original bow instructor, was Lauren Carney. Lauren Carney was taught by Casey Marks Nash, who was taught by Michael Bernardo, right? So I'm part of the Bernardo bow staff lineage, which of course means that I am part of the Casey Marks bow staff lineage, which is part of the reason why I think so highly of Casey. But all of that praise is going to be backed up by this routine that you're going to see here. And so that's how I would make the case for Casey Marks Nash as the greatest female competitor of all time. But obviously, there's much debate there, right? We have Caitlin Deschelle, who statistically dominated the women's division for the better part of 2 decades, right? Well, not in the women's division for 2 decades, but the girls and the juniors, and then up into the women's division for 5 to 7 years, somewhere in there, that she was in the women's division winning consistently. Maybe she was in the women's division for a full 10 years. I'm not 100% sure. But Caitlin Deschelle certainly has a statistical claim to that throne because she was near unbeatable for many, many years. I think I can count on the number on my hand, the number of times that I saw Caitlin lose. That's how dominant Caitlin was. And we actually talk about the success that she had in her career back in, I believe it's episode 34 of the podcast, maybe 10 episodes ago, maybe 35, somewhere in there. You can go back and watch the Caitlin Deschelle episode in which we talk about her legendary career. And there's others as well. There's Christine Bannon Rodriguez. There's also legendary fighters like Nikki Carlson Lee and Linda Denley. And there's so many that you could debate. But for me, and like I said, these are all forms that I saw with my own eyes, with the exception of this video. The reason that this video makes it in is because this is one of the earliest videos that I watched that inspired me to be good at bow. Like this is, so my original instructor back in my hometown at a local Taekwondo school, her name was Christy Strokert, she introduced me to bow. Once she introduced me to bow, I started going through YouTube and trying to find more people, right? That was when Cole Eckert was in his prime, so I was watching some of his videos. Obviously, Lauren Carney, who would go on to be my instructor, I was watching her videos, Corey Lutkus and Ross Levine and Nate Andrade. But this one always stood out, because this was my instructor's instructor who had become my instructor's instructor. And I just love the creativity of this routine. And that's one thing that is part of what makes Casey Marks so special, is the fact that she was creative without needing to increase her difficulty. She was doing techniques that other people had never seen or never thought of or never heard of, but it wasn't necessarily, with her throwing her weapon in the air, rolling it around her body. She was just being creative with the striking and the manipulations, which is extremely difficult to do. We see the extremely crisp striking here. And I mentioned that around 2004 was, in my opinion, kind of the start of her second prime, right? When I go back and I study the film, there's some of that creative bow manipulation, ducking under there. And then she's going to go into her release combo here, which is a Casey Marks signature. But to me, look at the quality of the striking. To me, the big difference in this second prime of Casey's career is that her striking had this surgical precision. Her striking was good before, don't get me wrong. But in this second prime, and we see it in this form here, I mean, just look at this opening strike combo. She is striking with such accuracy, with such technique, beautiful extension. She's hitting all of the right positions. That was a textbook up, down, side, side, a textbook sweep uppercut combination. There's another very clean striking combination there. She's executing everything with such ease and such cleanliness. And to me, that's what stands out about this routine, and that's what stands out about the modern era Casey Marks Nash that we've seen from her. It's just incredible, the precision and the attention to detail. I always tell my students, when you ascend from being a good competitor to being a great competitor, the difference that allows you to make that ascension is when you look this good every time you run a form. You're actively improving with every single form that you run. That is when you can be considered a great competitor, is when it's not just like, oh, you have your great moments and you win an overall every 4 or 5 tournaments. No, being a great competitor is about being able to string together 3, 4, 5 overall grand championship wins in a row because you always look that good. Casey Marks is the epitome of that. She's the epitome of greatness. And now we're going to go ahead and transition to a couple of honorable mentions. So these are forms that I don't necessarily hold in the same regard as some of the forms that we've looked at previously. Rather, these are forms that, for a number of reasons that I'm going to go through for each of these forms, I consider to be an honorable mention because I just couldn't put them in that upper echelon of the best forms that I'd ever seen. But that's not a knock on these forms because, as you are going to see, the next 2 forms are from Joshua Corton and Corey Lutkus. I'm going to go ahead and let this video play just a little bit more. And the reason that Joshua Corton and Corey Lutkus are honorable mentions on this list is simply because of the fact that they had so many great battles that I couldn't pick a form. My favorite battle they ever had was the 14-17 weapons runoffs at the U.S. Capitol Classics in 2008, I believe. I believe it was 2008. Might have been 2007, might have been 2009, but in that ballpark. And both of these men threw down. The videos used to be on YouTube. I have not been able to find them since I last looked them up probably a couple of years ago. But watching those 2 videos back to back and watching them go at it, I don't even remember who won. But watching them go at it, that was the best forms that I've ever seen from those 2 individuals, Joshua Corton, the sword specialist, and Corey Lutkus, the very influential bow specialist. And because I could not find those routines, I just picked 2 other routines. This one of Josh's I have seen in person at the 2008 U.S. Open, and then the one of Corey Lutkus I did not see in person, but it's a great video of him that I haven't shown on the podcast before. And so they're not honorable mentions because their talent wasn't deserving of getting into this top echelon that I've kind of arbitrarily created. It's simply because I could not find the forms that I do think fit in that category, and they had so many great battles that it's almost impossible to just pick one, right? So here, we're going to watch Josh Corton at the 2008 U.S. Open. This was against the likes of Rudy Raynon, Caitlin Deschelle, and Becca Ross, so a very, very deep division that we're watching here. And I believe if you saw the ESPN graphic there, this is when he was just 15 years old, which is pretty cool. I always love watching the old school U.S. Open videos with the ESPN bottom line. Obviously, you can see that when you watch the U.S. Open Night of Champions live nowadays. But I always just love seeing the bottom line with that classic ESPN logo and everything there. And then we see the great sword speed from Josh Corton here right away. He was one of the pioneers of kind of using the spine of the blade, the backside, the non-sharp side of the blade, and kind of trapping that into his wrist. He was one of the pioneers, among others like Kalman Choka and Johnny Liscar. He was one of the pioneers of doing techniques like that, where he was kind of using the dull side of the sword to create some new tricking techniques. Obviously, we're seeing more release techniques from him. Josh Corton, along with Johnny Liscar and Kalman Choka, like I mentioned, not only the trapping the dull side of the sword against their wrist, but really just with release techniques in general. Were huge pioneers of the art of performance sword. And then obviously he's mixing it in with the tricking techniques there as well. He's got that huge front flip there. I believe that's technically an Arabian. We also see the little sword finger roll transition there as he transitions to the other side. That was something that was very creative and unique, was to do a finger roll with the sword, much like you'd see with Kamas. We see that inward horizontal release that he did there. That was also very innovative. And just the difficulty level of this sword form for 2008 is very, very high. Sword was one of the first weapons to really kind of have a major difficulty increase in this kind of late 2000s, early 2010s era, with the likes of Johnny Liscar and Josh Corton, Kalman Choka, among others. Obviously, Kalman Choka would wind up innovating the double sword. We see a little bit of the slow-mo here. He almost did like a little palm spin, 2 little palm spins there with the handle of the sword. But anyway, so sword was kind of one of the first weapons to lead the release renaissance, if you will, where weapons releases started to become more and more popular. And then, of course, in recent years, kind of in the late 2010s, and obviously as we roll into the 2020s, we've seen bows start to be kind of the predominantly released weapon. Kamas had a little bit of a streak in there back in the peak days of Austin Crane and Tyler Weaver and Rudy Raynon. But nonetheless, sword was kind of one of the first weapons to really be innovated with release techniques, and Josh Corton epitomized that. And there's my coach, Lauren Carney, right there. Now we're going to go ahead and fast forward on to the next performance, which should be Corey Lutkus, if I remember correctly. Yes, okay. So this Corey Lutkus routine, first and foremost, we do have a little bit of history in the background over there to the right side of the screen. I believe that's Luke Brodlick, who's a very famous AKA competitor, wound up going on to be a dancer, went on tour with Britney Spears, had all kinds of success, which is very cool for him. But now, normally on the podcast, when I show Corey Lutkus videos, I show what most people would consider to be his prime, which was when he was on the American World Competition team in 2009, when he went near undefeated that year. I know that he didn't necessarily go undefeated, but he was very, very hard to beat in that 2009 season with this bow form. And you're going to see why. Now, the reason that I show 2007 here is because, number one, I feel like even though I think most people consider Corey's prime to be 2009 on American World Competition team, I feel that Corey's most iconic contributions to bow came when he was on Straight Up. So the moves that he innovated, obviously the iconic purple uniform that Team Straight Up had, which you see Corey wearing here. To me, these were the more influential forms that he did. So this is the 2007 Diamond Nationals weapons runoffs. I did not get to see this form in person, but I love watching this video, and you're going to see why right now. Corey was always a very intense competitor. You see him there with the big intense ki there at the beginning. I believe we might have caught a glimpse of Connor Griffith over there to the side, another bow staff innovator, mini bow staff tricks he created. Leviosa, one of the Corey Lutkus signatures right there, throwing the bow off the back of the hand, rotating horizontally in the air. He spins around and makes the catch. That was a Corey Lutkus classic. He had Leviosa in his form for as long as I can remember. Definitely a Corey Lutkus signature move. And then now he's setting up that vertical zero gravity technique right into the shoulder neck roll scarecrow. Scarecrow has been an extremely influential move in the history of bow staff innovation. Corey Lutkus is probably the one who is most famous for doing that. I'm not sure if Corey actually invented that technique, but I know that Corey Lutkus was definitely one of the innovators who popularized that technique and helped make it kind of a mainstream move. And I can't shout the praises of Corey Lutkus enough. Very influential in the development of bow. And you'll notice that I am going to mention kind of in these honorable mentions and these very influential forms, I'm going to mention a lot of bow forms because they were very influential to me. I mean, these are people that I looked up to. These are people that kind of shaped the future tricks that I would be attempting when I started trying to innovate bow myself. And when we talk about bow staff innovation, there's nobody else that you can talk about before you talk about Nate Andrade, which is the form that we are about to watch. You may remember him if you were, on the NASCAR circuit back in the 2000s. You may remember him as the guy who you could hear him yell, "Showtime!" from across the room when he was about to do a form, because that's how he started every routine. He would always walk to the back of the ring, do a big arm circle, and yell, "It's showtime!" right before he would do a form. And it just gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because you always knew that Nate Andrade was about to throw down a form when you heard that yell going on. And now we're going to take a look at this here. So many of the body rolls, rolling the bow around the body, so many of those were innovated by Nate Andrade. It's truly just nostalgic to watch a form like this. What even tournament is this at? I don't even know what tournament this is at. This is back in the day. Don't even know what year it is. I want to say this has got to be mid-2000s most likely. We see that classic neck roll combo there. Big extension on the striking. Nate was always known for big extension on over the head strikes and the reverse thrusts. He was always really exaggerating those techniques, similarly to how we saw Matt Emmett kind of exaggerating reverse punches. And then we see Starry Night. I'm going to interrupt this form and rewind that just a little bit to speak about Starry Night here. Starry Night, this is a shoulder neck roll that then goes down the chest, and then he turns into that behind the back catch. That is unprecedented for this time period. That you see that rarely attempted in forms today. That is absolutely a game changer. We see him doing kind of the inverted neck roll there, leaning over. The signature straight jacket roll that he does, reaching around and grabbing the bow as it wraps around his back. I mean, so many of these moves that he performed and that he also passed on to his training partner and student, Ross Levine, who won several weapons overalls in his career. You can go back and watch a recent Sport Karate Throwback Thursday that I posted on the Black Belt Magazine website. You can go ahead and check that out. If you just go in and blackbeltmag.com, go in the search bar and just search Throwback Thursday. You'll get my full series of Sport Karate Throwback Thursdays. The most recent one was a Ross Levine form from the 2003 Diamond Nationals, in which he also performed a Starry Night, among other very impactful bow staff tricks that were innovated by Nate Andrade. So Nate Andrade, kind of in the same boat as Billy Ledger, is someone who I feel never really got the respect that they should have in terms of their career overall grand championships count. They never won as much as I felt that they should have, but still extremely influential to the development of modern bow. And there's nothing more I can say about Nate Andrade than an innovator and someone who helped shape the weapons competition that we see today. We've got a couple of more honorable mentions here before we transition into, in my opinion, the greatest singular performance that I've ever watched. And I'm going to give you some suspense leading up to that. If you didn't watch episode 3, then you don't know what's coming. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that on you guys here at the end here. But first, we still have 2 more forms that I wanted to mention. Now, this Steve Terada form, I did not have the pleasure of watching. I believe this is the last year, which would have been 2007. That Diamond Nationals was at the old venue where they kind of had this amphitheater, I guess, seating where everybody is kind of seated all the way around the stage. They moved over to the more recent venue beginning in 2008, which was my first, well, it wasn't my first Diamond Nationals, but it was the first time that I went to the Diamond Nationals night show because I got on stage at the Diamond Nationals in 2008. I just hadn't been able to make it to the night show at this tournament the first couple of times that I attended. So anyway, here we have Steve Terada, and the reason that I include Steve Terada here, once again, this is a form that I've only seen on video, but I just remember being a kid back in 2006 and seeing Steve Terada at tournaments and just always being impressed by his intensity, how high he could jump. I mean, he was a high-flying competitor, which you're, of course, going to see this in his routine. And I would say, and this is, again, probably something that could be up for debate down in the comments, Steve Terada probably had the most unique style of anybody that's ever competed. Like, I can't think of anybody that looks like Steve Terada looked. Like, most competitors you can draw similarities to, but if you just look at the way that he executes his hand combination, the way that he does his tricking techniques, the way that he kicks, he finished that split kick before he ever even started to fall down, which is crazy. Or not fall down, but, come back down to the ground. Gravity started to take effect, right? It's just such a unique style. And to me, the uniqueness of Steve Terada, of course, that athletic ability, we see the huge statue that he does there. That's just always stood out. We see the little breakdancing technique there. Some of you may know that Steve Terada would later go on to dance with Quest Crew and win America's Best Dance Crew. That very popular TV show that he won along with his dance troupe, as of course we get hit here with another ad. But I just wanted to throw Steve Terada in there just because of how vividly I remember how unique and how creative and how skilled Steve Terada was in the open forms category. We also recently did a Sport Karate Throwback Thursday on Steve Terada on the Black Belt Mag website. So once this episode is over, make sure that you go ahead and check that out as well. And now we transition. I believe this is the last honorable mention. Now, this is a form that I did watch with my own eyes here at the 2010 American Internationals. This is Rudy Raynon in the Adult Weapons Grands. I believe this is an overall Grand Championship winning form. And in my opinion, and I've voiced this opinion before, I feel that Rudy Raynon is the greatest comic competitor of all time because of his speed, the power that he put behind his cuts, the technique and the purpose that he had when he would do his cuts. He also mixed that with extremely advanced finger spin manipulations, which you're going to be seeing in this routine. A lot of modern comic competitors kind of lean on the release techniques, similarly to how I complimented Casey Marks for not so much innovating with releases, but more so innovating with her creativity of the manipulations. Rudy is kind of parallel to that in the sense that Rudy never really did many comma releases, if any, that I can think of. He was more focused on how he was manipulating the weapon, right? And in this era, in the 2005 to 2015 era, that was really, really important, was the manipulation. Now, clearly, post kind of 2013 on, we've seen releases start to become more and more essential. It's one thing that a lot of people don't realize about my career is that the reason that I do as many bow releases as I do, I would prefer to do more striking and do less releases in my routine, even though I always ensure to have a balanced approach. I always make sure that I have a greater number of striking techniques than I do trick techniques in my routine. Nonetheless, I wish that it could be even more strikes, but because of the modern standard of competition, competitors are expected to do a certain number of release techniques in order to be able to win. And so if all of a sudden I went from having 11 or 12 release techniques in my form and I brought that down to 7 or 8 release techniques in my form, it would seem as if I was holding back. And so by modern competitive standards, releases have become more important. But in this era, it was all about the manipulations, and that's what we see from Rudy Reynon, and he was a master of those manipulations, not to mention the fact that Rudy also impacted several other great comic competitors to come after him. He trained both Mackenzie Emery and Tyler Weaver. Mackenzie Emery lays claim to potentially the greatest female comic competitor of all time, right? She's definitely in that conversation, up there with others like Michaela Johnson, who innovated a lot of the comma releases to show kind of the other side of the spectrum. And then also Tyler Weaver, he had the iconic form back when he did the blindfolded comma form at the 2005 U.S. Open. Don't quote me on that. You have to go look that up to figure out which U.S. Open he did the blindfolded comma form. But he did the blindfolded comma form and made the appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show and all of that. That was actually really helped sport karate kind of become more popular in that mid-2000s era. But both of those great competitors were trained by Rudy Reynon, which, in my opinion, it's also about the legacy that you leave that helps you elevate to GOAT status. And that's why I feel like Rudy Reynon is probably the comma GOAT in my book. And obviously, there's other cases that you could make for that particular jurisdiction. But in my opinion, it's Rudy. So now we're going to take a look at this routine. All right. I used to love this Amerikick Internationals backdrop, how they had like the projector screen. I always thought that was a cool way to present the logo there. And now you're going to see the speed and the power of the comma cuts that Rudy Reynon would do. You're going to see that on display in this form, and it is just incredible. Nice big 7 cuts there. A lot of people cut their 7 cuts too short nowadays. Rudy's 7 cuts were huge, the cuts that draw the number 7 going across the chest and then down across the torso. That was the signature technique of his, that trick going one way and then the aerial back into the splits. And then now we see some of these unique finger spin manipulations and then spinning with his finger inside the hole on the blade of the comma there, spinning the comma. He was the person that innovated that. A lot of people remember Tyler Weaver for doing that, but that's because Tyler was a student of Rudy. Rudy was the one who made up that technique, and Rudy should get his credit for that. So very, very solid form there from Rudy Reynon, an extremely influential comma competitor. And so that's why I had to add him in to this honorable mention list here. And again, some of these honorable mentions were simply because I didn't get to see enough of their career or see enough of their forms, right? Again, the people who I have included in the best forms that I have ever seen is only people that I saw with my own eyes and that they had some type of influence on my career. That's kind of how I'm doing this. And in the future, like I said, I've already thought of more forms that should probably be included on this list from other great competitors. And I've even mentioned some of those great competitors' names throughout this show. So if you want to hear what those are, go ahead, let me know down in the comments, and we can certainly accommodate that. But you just got to let me know. Or if there are specific forms that you guys want me to do a film study on, throw those specific links down in the comments, and I will review those particular forms. I also want to get into reviewing some more modern competitors. We've done a lot of kind of going back in the day, back in the 90s, early 2000s, early 2010s. We've done a lot of kind of reviewing sport karate history from that perspective. I want to start by bringing in some more fighting. We're going to be doing more fighting film study with some fighting guests coming up very soon. So stay on the lookout for that. So that will be coming up in the near future. But I also want to start doing some more not critiques, but more commentaries of modern competitors. So if there's anybody that you want me to watch in that regard, or if there's anybody that you want me to watch with, right? We do this film study episodes with guests as well. So feel free to go ahead and say, you know, if you want me to watch forms alongside Kalman Choka, for example, you want me to watch forms alongside Matt Emig, drop that down in the comments, let me know, and I can make that happen for you guys. So now we are going to transition to, in my opinion, this is the best form that I ever watched in person, right? And I don't necessarily mean just in terms of the execution. I really mean in terms of the moment, right? And when most people think Kalman Choka, those of you that know Kalman Choka, most of you think of the blindfolded retirement form, the most iconic retirement in the history of sport karate. When Kalman, everybody knew he was retiring, he put on the blindfold, hit most of his double sword releases blindfolded. He took, a couple of his releases out, but he was blindfolded. So what do you expect, right? He hit most of his double sword releases blindfolded, won the diamond ring. I think he got 6 10s and 199 from the Russian judge. Rode off into the sunset in the most beautiful way that you could possibly ride off into the sunset. But to me, the better form was the Diamond Nationals before that. His father had recently passed away. It was a very emotional weekend for Kalman and his whole family, including Audrey Donahue and Austin Crane, Carson Donahue, and other competitors, right? And you can just feel that emotion come through in this form. One thing that I always respected about Kalman Choka is that when Kalman took the stage, everybody was silent, right? A lot of times people take the stage and you'll hear a cheer when they say the name, right? And then you'll hear maybe like a murmuring, right? With Kalman, you maybe heard an initial cheer over the fact that Kalman was coming on stage. But what Kalman always did was he would let the announcer say his name before he walked on stage, so that the announcement that he's next and him arriving on the stage were two separate moments. The announcement that he's next would typically be met with applause. But then when Kalman actually took the stage, there was this hush that overcame everybody, because everybody knew that Kalman Choka was about to do a double sword form, right? So his decision to start doing double sword in 2007, I want to say it was probably one of the most significant decisions that a competitor has ever made, because it changed Kalman's career. Kalman was already considered an innovator of sword. Kalman was already considered a great sword competitor. But even though Kalman had won overalls, he had not been the dominant force that he was when he started doing the double sword routine. When in 2009 at the Diamonds, when he introduced the double sword form, 2007. 2007, I believe it was, at the Diamonds when he introduced the double sword form, all the way through 2011 Diamonds when he ran the last double sword form, he maybe lost with that double sword routine 3 times at most in that span. And that is unprecedented. He claimed Diamonds records. He climbed the Warrior Cup all-time ratings. The man completely changed his career with the success that he had with this double sword routine. And now, without any further delay, let's enjoy this. So we see him backing up. You see he was always such a showman, such a performer. You see the drama building as he gets ready to perform this routine. And then just the attention to details. You see that he had the double low blocks, but then he added like the extra technique to extend the wrists there and flick the blades of the sword. The attention to detail is just incredible to me. And then we see that was a release that he almost never did, that kind of release going over the top. We're going to go back and rewatch that combo because that is incredible. Release going over the top into the 360 spin catch and then the double sword release, throwing both swords at the same time. That was something that he rarely did. He stepped his game up for this Diamond Nationals. Obviously, that was a classic release combo from him there. That tornado jump with the double cuts going out, that was another Kalman Choka classic technique here. The double cuts down. I also felt that Kalman was moving faster in this routine. You see the closing move as he catches that horizontal spinning release. I also felt that Kalman was moving faster in this routine than he was in a lot of his previous routines. If you're going to find any criticism of Kalman Choka, you could maybe say that he could have been a little bit faster, but you've also got to remember this is 2010. So the speed standard in 2010 was different than what it is now. So for 2010, he was moving really, really fast. And in this form in particular, I think he kind of upgraded himself into another speed category with the speed that he was running this form at. And so let's go ahead and rewind, and you see the emotional finish there with him lifting his finger to the sky in memory of his dad. I want to make sure that we go over this opening release combo one more time, because this was a substantially riskier release combo than most that Kalman did. We see that release going under the arm and then over his head, the 360, and then the double release catching in double reverse grips there. And then he has the presence of mind to add that little extra release. Did you catch that? This is another thing that makes Kalman Choka great. I want you to notice right after he does the double release, watch his right hand. Watch his right hand. Do you see that? He had the presence of mind to know that when he caught that right-handed sword, that the sword was backwards, so he needed to switch his grip, so that he could get the blade facing away and be in a forward grip position. He uses a little release technique to do that, and then he transitions on into the next section. And those are the little things that separate, the great competitors from the all-time great competitors, right? Is the ability to have that presence of mind and make those adjustments. And then obviously we see the horizontal rotation catch there rolling off the other sword. That was a classic. Once again, the homage to his father by pointing in the sky. And then, and I was in this crowd. This crowd was raucous when he finished his form because everybody knew what had happened to his dad. Nobody really knew that he was going to retire the next year. Some people even thought that this may be it for him. So the emotion in this room was just absolutely incredible. And I absolutely here at the end do want to give a shout out as their logo comes up on screen to all of the great brands that have been able to keep the history of sport karate alive by providing us with these videos. Sportmartialarts.com, Old School Karate, Black and Blue Video, and so many others. Zen Inc. There's so many great sources. Unfortunately, the Zen Inc. YouTube channel has been discontinued, but there's so many great sources of sport karate history, and absolutely sportmartialarts.com and Black and Blue Video in particular have been a leader of that for many, many years now. And so Black Belt Magazine extends our utmost gratitude to those brands for continuing to keep the history of sport karate alive, because in my opinion, I feel it's extremely important to the history or to the future of this sport that we continue to focus on and respect the history so that we can know where we came from. Just like in the game of basketball, even though you have a ton of great players now, like your LeBron James of the world and your Giannis Antetokounmpos and your Kawhi Leonards and so on and so forth, in basketball, you're always hearing them talk about the previous generations, whether that be in recent memory with the greatest basketball player of all time, of course, Michael Jordan, and whether that be a little bit further back with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, or whether it be even further back as you look at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and then you go back to Wilt, and then you go back to Bill Russell, right? And basketball has done an incredibly good job of preserving the history of their game, right? And I think that is something that is essential for the future of sport karate, is that we try to replicate that within our sport and preserve the history of this game so that people know where all of this stuff comes from. Why do we release our weapons nowadays? How has tricking evolved? Why is the speed of the game different than it used to be? And I think that these are all things that these are all questions that you can answer by looking at some of these old videos, right? From Kalman Choka to Matt Emig and all of the great competitors in between. Once again, keep in mind that these are only forms that I saw with my own eyes. I was not around in the 90s. I was not around in the early 2000s to see some of those all-time great routines done by many of those all-time great competitors, your Mike Chats of the world and your John Valeras and your Carmichael Simons and your Ho Sung and Ho Young Poks and all of those great competitors. And I know that I'm leaving people out when I make that list, and obviously, when I was thinking about who else needs to be added, I realized, how did I not have Kevin Thompson on this list, right? There should absolutely be a Kevin Thompson form on this list, right? So I definitely think that I am going to do another edition of kind of my favorite forms. And maybe I won't do my favorite forms that I've seen with my own eyes. Maybe I'll do my favorite forms that you're actually still able to go on and watch on YouTube. Maybe that's what I'll do for the next edition of the film study episodes. But ultimately, I'm going to do whatever the viewers want. Whatever you guys want to see, that is what we're going to be doing. That is the type of film that we're going to be studying. Those are the type of guests that we're going to be having. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that anybody that's been with me from the beginning when we did episode 3, I hope that you enjoyed this opportunity to see all of those forms that I talked about in that episode. And then absolutely let me know what you want to hear in the future. If there's specific forms, specific athletes you want me to cover, drop those down in the comments. I'll be more than happy to do so. And I understand this is my opinion. I'm not saying that this is what Black Belt Magazine thinks are the best forms of the 2010 era or of the late 2000s era. That's not what I'm saying at all. This is just Jackson Rudolph's opinion of some of the best forms and some of the most influential forms that I'd ever seen. I separated those a little bit into the absolute best forms and then some of those that were more honorable mentions just because they maybe didn't get the respect they should have gotten or because they had so many great forms that I couldn't pick, right? So that's kind of where that came into play. So much respect to everybody that was featured in this video. Much respect to everybody that was mentioned but maybe not featured, and I hope to be able to mention you guys that I mentioned but did not feature in future episodes as well, because the the Jackson Rudolph podcast is going to keep on rolling. We're going to keep bringing you sport karate history. We're going to keep bringing you sport karate news and updates. We're going to keep bringing you the profiles of some of these great characters in sport karate. And that's one of the most important things that I want everybody to recognize about the interviews. When you see a Jackson Rudolph podcast episode come up with an athlete, the goal is for people to connect with that athlete. I want everybody to know who that person is. When we've had Bailey Murphy on the show, we've had Caitlin Deschelle on the show, we've had Matt Emick on the show, or whoever it may be. We've had Sammy Smith on the show, whoever, right? I want our viewers to be able to connect with that athlete and understand how they approach martial arts, understand their background, where they come from, their values. That is the utility of this show. I want everybody to be able to connect with those athletes, and I want to help those athletes have a voice to be able to tell the martial arts community what they think about martial arts issues and sport karate issues alike, because those are separate things. The great world of martial arts is much broader than just sport karate. But of course, this show will always have a sport karate focus because I'm a sport karate guy. So once again, that was a little bit of my public service announcement there at the end there. But thank you to everybody that's tuning in. Thank you to Black Belt Magazine for sponsoring the podcast and giving us this excellent platform for the show. Once again, questions, future episode recommendations, and debates, throw those down in the comments. I want to see the debates going down there. What do you think? And this is the number one question I want you to answer in the comments. What do you think is the best form that you've ever seen with your own eyes? Think of the best form you've ever seen with your own eyes. Throw the links down in the comments. And who knows, maybe I'll do a film study episode where I just watch all those videos that you guys, our viewers, thought were the best forms of all time. That's all that I've got. Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, I'm Jackson Rudolph, and this has been episode 44 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I'll catch you next time.